Imagine this kind of power, this predictive power based on big data from social media alone. Imagine it in the hands of a dictator with total power, because he or she could use that to not just find the dissenters and the disloyal people in the population, but to predict who 5 years from now may become disloyal. So you can go kill them you can go imprison or kill them before they've even done anything, just because they're on some sort of path that your algorithm predicts will one day make them disloyal to your government.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic, where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a bi-weekly basis. I'm your host, Nathan Dickey, and here with me today is Jenna and Cal.
Hey, it's good to be back.
Yes, all good.
Yeah.
Just about.
It's always a bonus.
Joining us today as our special guest for this episode is Guy P. Harrison. Guy is an award-winning journalist and globetrotter who has visited 28 countries on 6 continents. Does that sound right to you?
I think I'm up to about 31 now, but yeah, close enough, whatever. Who's counting?
And he's talked to people of all kinds of backgrounds and persuasions to understand basically what makes humans tick. He has written 7 books that promote critical thinking and skepticism, including 50 popular beliefs that people think are true, Think Why You Should Question Everything, and the book we're discussing today, Race and Reality, What Everyone Should Know About Our Biological Diversity. He joins us on the show today to talk about the science and social issues behind race and diversity, and whether any of the preconceptions we have on this issue are backed up by science and evidence. Welcome to the show, Guy P. Harrison.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to talking with you.
So I've read your book, Race and Reality, and thought that it was full of issues that have become relevant in recent years and seem to be becoming more and more relevant as each passing year goes by. And you kind of opened the book hitting the ground running by saying straight off the bat, biological races do not exist. And what do you mean by that? What are we talking about when we talk about race, and why doesn't it exist when it seems like such a common sense concept to almost everybody?
Yeah, you're great at your job, because you asked the perfect question to start with, because this topic is so confounding and confusing and inflammatory, and people have so much emotional investment in it that it's really hard to hear what people say when you're talking about race. But one thing I just always have to make crystal clear before we get into the details is exactly what I'm claiming. Okay, when I say biological races are not real, that is in no way a denial of human biological diversity. That's real. Okay, I'm not some guy who's trying to do away with racism by closing my eyes at the reality before us. We are different. We do have differences. We're a very young and a relatively closely related species, no doubt about that. But we do have differences. We adapted to different environments on different continents. We've had different sexual dynamics and populations. Things have happened differently for people around the world, and we all, kind of look a little different. And you can draw some conclusions and be right most of the time or some of the time by looking at people. That's all true. We come in all shapes and sizes, all kinds of colors. All that is true. No denial of that. The problem is that in trying to make sense of ourselves over the last, several centuries, we've constantly tried to label each other. And we have failed miserably at it because it just doesn't make sense. It's just a cultural game, applying these labels to huge populations, groups of people, and then pretending that it's completely biological. It's all, nature imposed this on us. We didn't do it, nature did. You're over in that category and I'm in this category because of nature, nothing to do with culture. And that's wrong. That's completely wrong. And the real problem, the reason we need to come to grips with this and see ourselves in a more realistic light, is because it causes all kinds of harm. Because when you label people, when you place them into these boxes, you do so with all these imposed psychological restrictions and implied talents, things like that can really affect people, sometimes good, but most of the time in negative ways. I mean, we are squandering tremendous efficiency. Our species could be so much more productive and peaceful, I believe, if we had a more realistic view of ourselves. If we understood our evolutionary history, if we all understood how we kind of fit together, how we got here. How did one, our genus used to be pretty crowded. There were several human species running around in Africa, at the same time. And only one of them survived. The last two faded away 30,000, 50,000 years ago. Here we are all alone. Well, how did we get here? How are we alike? How are we different? These are fundamental questions we've got to ask and answer. And the thing is, science can answer them very well for us right now. I mean, there's many, many questions to be answered, of course, but there's really good information out there for anyone. You just got to ask the question, look for the answers, and you got to be honest about what you find, because the problem is, like I said, these racial labels have become so important to us. Oh, they're just absolutely vital for many people. Their whole self-worth, their self-perception is tangled up in this racial belief thing, and it's a real problem, a real problem. But it's crucial. I want to repeat this one more time so your listeners hear me loud and clear, okay? I do not deny biological diversity. I do not deny real differences in the human species. If they're real, they're there. No problem. Let's deal with them. No problem. What I deny is a category called black people, and people thinking that actually makes some kind of biological sense. It's nonsense. Think about it. Barack Obama, real quick, 30-second example here. Barack Obama, the first African-American president in American history, historic achievement, right? But you know what's weird about that? He is more genetically distant from a typical African American than I am as a person that would be considered a white person of recent European descent. He's more closely related to me by far, because his mother is a white woman, okay, and his father was an East African, and by far the overwhelming majority of African Americans, their genetic ancestry, their recent ancestry goes to West Africa, and West Africans, East Africans, very distant genetically, very distant. It's absurd to lump them into one race and think it makes biological sense. All right, I could go on forever, but you guys talk. Go ahead.
I'm so intrigued to hear you say that, because labeling is one of my bugbears anyway, not just in sort of racial labeling, but beyond that, in the LGBT community, for example, which is constantly being split out into more and more subcategories and more diverse sort of definitions of individuals. And then, of course, beyond that, into more and more diverse genders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People are trying to segregate themselves and make their unique personality into this sort of unique pocket that is just them and people like them. And this is something that incredibly frustrates me, because that increased division is something that I've been trying to work against my entire life.
That's a good point,
transsexual
Jenna.
Person. And it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, you know what, Jenna. As you'll find as the conversation goes on, I'm an absurd optimist. I always hope for the best, and want everything to work out so well. But one thing, you're exactly right about this constant shrinking down of more and more categories and shoving everybody into them and all. I think what's happening, we're going through a process maybe where we're kind of waking up to the fact that, hey, there's a lot of differences between us. Physically and psychologically, culturally, we've got all these differences, and we've been reacting to it by dividing ourselves. But I think hopefully maybe we can get to a point where we realize, wow, we are just a trillion different things, but we're all one. And then all of a sudden, once we accept that diversity, maybe we can kind of get past the labels and start to really accept each other as all just humans, which is what we are. We're just humans on a planet. That's what we are.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the point you made in your book at one point, talking about if biological races are real, then what we would have to do in order to say that and be in line with what the evidence says is divide humanity into thousands or even millions of different races.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, if you wanted to really get technical about it, and a lot of people who are really into the genetics, they say, hey, what about this gene? You can track it to people from Africa. That gene, you can track it, people to Europe and all. I go, okay, well, keep going with it. Keep going with it. And you end up with 1 million races. And my whole point has always been that our biological reality, our biological diversity does not align with the popular notion of race categories. Okay, I'm talking about everyday people, 99.9% of the people who believe in white people, black people, Asians, Native Americans, that kind of stuff, that kind of race belief, that traditional race belief, which is never consistent, by the way, you could go around the world and it's different for everybody, but that traditional kind of race belief does not align with our biological reality. That's my point.
I was just going to say, sort of like the current times we're living in, and one thing that comes up is the bell curve. Is there any scientific validity over that? I know it's a highly controversial book. So what's your kind of view on that?
Yeah, it might surprise people, but I don't immediately go, oh, garbage, burn those books and all, because I kind of have this attitude that we should investigate everything. We should look into everything. We should explore the deepest, darkest parts of humanity. If you got a serial killer locked up, God, interview him 10 times a day, find out what's going on in him. I want to learn everything possible to be learned. So I'm not against social scientists looking into something as potentially troublesome and creepy as race and IQ. But here's the problem. Here's the problem that Charles Murray and all these other guys that, use this as some sort of a reason to say, oh, see, black people just aren't quite up to snuff, compared to Europeans. I shouldn't say, I don't want to quote Charles Murray as saying that. I'm sure he's never directly said that, but many of his fans say that. They use his work as evidence to make their case that black people are inferior. But here's the problem. You start out with a flawed category system. It doesn't make any sense. African Americans, what are they? They are people brought to the United States, 4 centuries ago. They've been sexually mingling for centuries with white people. They've been in a unique cultural situation. It's all ridiculous because IQ itself, while an absolutely valid, a very good predictor of success in certain aspects of certain cultural settings, like maybe college, professional employment, it could be a very good indicator of success in that. But it's not what people think it is. People think you can measure IQ and come up with some average score for a whole population of people and then draw conclusions about how smart those people are. Because there's all kinds of intelligence, and who gets to decide what kind of intelligence counts? That's a big question. And another part is almost in every case, people do not give enough weight to environment. You take a black kid who grows up in Detroit, he's drinking Coca-Cola, half a gallon of Cokes every day, and he's eating Captain Crunch cereal, for lunch and dinner, and he's going to a terrible school with, underpaid teachers and no books in the library, and his mom's working all the time. And then you give him an IQ test when he's, 13. And you're going to use that score to help make your case about some specific intellectual potential of millions of people who are incorrectly jammed into a racial category to begin with many problems with that. But you're going to do that? It makes no sense. You can't measure potential really, because potential, you don't know it till it's happened. I argue in my book that I might have been an NFL quarterback. I could have been. And one time as an example I gave in another one of my books, I was sitting on the couch with my son watching an NFL game, and he said, what, did you play football in high school? I said, no, I was a runner, I never played football. And he goes, why? Do you think you could do it? You think you could be a quarterback in the NFL? And my first thought, I laughed and I went, oh yeah, sure, right. If I had been born, 5 inches taller and had a rocket arm and blah, 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 yeah, sure, I could have made it, no problem. But what I was doing, I was playing the talent card. I was excusing myself making an excuse for myself for not being an NFL quarterback by saying, oh, I never had the genetic talent. And then I thought about it later. I said, wait a minute, that was kind of a coward's way out there because I never tried. I don't know. Maybe I could have been a quarterback. I didn't try. I did not play the game from the time I was 10, and I didn't obsess over it and have a poster of John Elway and all these great players in my bedroom that I worshipped at the altar of the NFL every night before I went to bed. And I didn't, lift weights compulsively to be a great NFL player one day. Who knows? Maybe I could have been. I didn't try. And we do that as humans all the time. Terrible. This whole concept of talent, and it plays right into the race problem. It's a big, big problem because we use it as an excuse. You look at people like, Mozart, Michael Jackson. There's a great interview of Michael Jackson before he died. The interview asked him, said, where do you get all these, these lyrics and these ideas for your dance moves and all? And he points up to the sky and he goes, oh, it just comes to me. It's a talent. It just comes. It's in me. I was born with it. And I thought, how ridiculous. And everybody nods their head in agreement. Yeah, he was born with that talent, born to sing and dance. And I thought, how ridiculous. His father literally forced him to practice singing and dancing every day, hours and hours a day, miss school so he could practice hours a day from the age of like 4 or 5. And if he didn't practice well enough, he might get hit with a belt. I mean, if he required all that practice, if he was so talented, why would he require all that work? It's the same with Asian students. And this is interesting as a part of my Race and Reality book about this. Asians in America, they're considered, they're just, genetically smarter. They do math. Like they fall out of the womb and they're doing calculus. They're just talented. White people are okay. Black people, no chance at algebra. That's just how it goes. It's a racial thing. That's where the talents play out. But interesting thing, if you look at the studies are there. Guess who studies the most? Guess who spends the most time working the hardest, doing homework every night in high school and college? Asian American students. Guess who's most likely to be in a study group, which really can enhance your success for many types of coursework? Asian Americans. They form study groups. They spend more time in the library studying. They work harder. So if they're more talented, if there's some magic in the Asian race, as if that's a sensible thing, then why the hell do they have to work so hard at it? Shouldn't it be easy?
That's interesting because I was having a similar conversation the other night about photography and about how some people just have an eye for it, apparently, but the reality is that I was, for example, really shit in school at art, and it took me a lot of effort to try and get good at art and try and understand what I was seeing and try and interpret that in a way that I could actually draw it on paper. And I've lost that since because I didn't practice that skill. But with photography, that's something that I've practiced from a very, very young age. That's something that I enjoyed because it was a way of preserving a memory in a way that I could then look back at it again in the future and see where I'd been, because I didn't go very many places. So it was very, very important to me to actually develop that skill to a point where it would preserve the memory in a way that I would actually recognize that scene and be able to make an emotional connection to it. And it was only through that practice, through that perseverance, through perpetuating that skill throughout my life that I actually have become fairly decent at photography. And it's the same with every other aspect of life, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it's not a denial that some people do have gifts. Some people do. And that's where the real magic happens. When a person who really, really is gifted in some way, has the real genetic potential to be great, when they happen to, by chance or by some kind of intelligent direction, end up focusing themselves on that one thing that they really are talented. But that's where we get the real superstars. That's when it happens. But I tell you, you don't know what you're great at until you try. You got to try. That's why it's so important, if you're a parent, if you got children, man, expose them to everything. Encourage them to do everything. If they find something they love doing and they're, halfway good at it or whatever, and then they turn out to maybe even have a little bit of true talent at it. Wow, that's where great things happen.
Yeah, we just talked about the controversy about race and IQ and it being a subject that not a lot of, especially progressive people, want to bring up. The other question that's people are uncomfortable asking, but which needs to be addressed in any discussion that aims to educate people about why race is not a useful concept when trying to understand the course of history, is the question that Jared Diamond spends nearly 500 pages trying to come to terms with in his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And that is, why were Eurasians throughout history able to conquer so much of the world with seemingly relative ease?
Yeah, great book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's a fascinating idea. And, I honestly, I wouldn't say it's rock solid, case closed, but basically for your listeners, what he's pointing out is that the people of Eurasia, the prehistoric people of Eurasia, really lucked out because they had all these great resources in animals that could be were relatively easy to domesticate. They had these wheat grains, that were just relatively easy to domesticate. So they had, sort of horticulture, agriculture kind of fell in their lap there. I mean, still there was inventiveness, there was brilliance, there was hard work, no denying all that. But when you compare what they had to people on the African continent, to people in Australia, to people in South America and North America, the Caribbean islands, nothing in comparison. So they really it looks like they had a head start on urbanization, which then gave them a head start on immunities to many of our most deadly diseases, which jumped from animals to us. So domesticated animals to us. So, he kind of points out that if there was a big advantage that these white people had, the conquistadors and Christopher Columbus and all them, when they were showing up on everybody's shores like, advanced alien species from another planet, like how did they have that technological advantage? Well, it's because they had a treasure chest of natural resources to work with way back in the prehistoric times, which gave them a head start on everybody else. And, that could be, you could argue that's an oversimplification. There's so many other factors at play. There may be other factors which even contradict that. There's a lot there, but man, it is a great, great idea. And it makes a lot of sense when you really lay it out and you look what they had. Because you look at, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, you're not putting a saddle on a zebra, okay? You are not hooking up your wagon behind a rhino, okay? You don't have, horses. And a lot of people don't know this, but there were no horses in the Americas, until Europeans brought them. Actually, there were like 1 million years ago or something, but they went extinct. So when the Native Americans were, living in the New World, they didn't have horses when the Europeans showed up. So these Europeans show up riding horses, and it's basically like some guy riding a tank, it's completely like a huge advantage. And that's just one example. The horse, for centuries, that was just such a tremendous advantage for work, for combat, big advantage. One thing, the pig, source of food. So many things. And the natural resources, plant and animal, of the Americas were very, very limited compared to Eurasia. So it's an interesting concept and all, but I guess it's the anthropologist in me or something, or maybe that optimist in me, but I always try to view us as, we're one young species. And one of our biggest problems is always that we've exaggerated the distance between us, and we've exaggerated the really what are trivial physical differences between us. And that's really where the problem always comes in. It's the fact that we confront someone face to face, whether it's, 4 centuries ago or today on a sidewalk, and we see the differences and we make a big deal about them rather than, acknowledging the much more important and profound universals that we share. We all have family structure. We all have the same hopes and fears generally. We have so much in common. And that's why, I think the world would be a better place if everybody would take a Anthropology 101 class. I tell you, it would enlighten the world just so people would realize, how much we have in common and how young we really are. And take a few ecology courses as well. And then you'd realize how small this planet is. It's not really this infinite, kingdom with all these different species of humans clashing, the way we imagine it to be.
Yeah, from a data analyst perspective, because that's what I do for a job, I find it absolutely fascinating that you bring up the different factors that could be contributing to certain advances or certain perceived advances in different parts of the world and the civilizations that have grown up around them. I think it would be a really interesting piece to be able to piece together everything in a big data environment in terms of things that may have affected the local ecology and also the economies as we've grown them as well, to find out what things could correlate to the advances that we perceive. And I'm sure that's probably already being done somewhere. I don't know. I don't know how these things are.
You know what? That's a brilliant idea. It really is. I don't think it's been done, at least not that I know of, not in a big sense, because that's a great idea. I just finished a book on social media and the internet. It's called Think Before You Like. It comes out in November. But I just finished it. And I have a big section on big data. You know, we now live in this era of big data where, I mean, we can amass so much information, and then we can have these algorithms just wade into it and try to spit out useful conclusions, you know, that we can maybe do something with. And a lot of times it's used for mischief or nonsense, but man, that's fascinating. You know, we now live in a time where, yeah, we could just collect mountains and mountains of data, you know, one culture and another culture, and throw it all into the mix. And if we're smart enough to figure out the right algorithm, we could kind of maybe figure something out that we didn't know before. You know, that's fascinating. Yeah.
The algorithm that was used to detect the Higgs boson has applications within business as well. There's a business called Blue Yonder that I spoke to a few years ago, and they actually took us on a little tour around CERN, which was fascinating. But the algorithm that was actually used for that can be used in big business to actually factor into, try and figure out which different products are selling well and actually predict which products are going to sell in the next period based on trends within buying of people. So those kind of same things can actually be used to develop pattern seeking within many different factors within different areas. I think it would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah. One of the things I was surprised in this book about social media I did, there are firms out there that they charge money to businesses or maybe even governments to tell people who, you know, certain social media users really are. They can isolate people, figure out who they are based on just their likes, you know, something like fewer than 20 like. When I say like, I mean, if you're on Facebook and you like a photo or you like a meme or something, just on, you know, something like 10 or 15 likes that seem really benign and not connected to anything of meaning. It could just be your favorite spaghetti sauce, you know, you like that page or something, you know, something weird like that, or, you know, a movie you like or whatever. But they can, within 10 or 15 likes, analyzing, they can figure out if that person is gay or heterosexual, if they're conservative or liberal, if they're atheist or religious. I mean, all these things that you'd never think. It's just not obvious. If you or I looked at that, you know, those 10 or 15 likes, we wouldn't be able to know anything about that person, but algorithms can do it because they've got so much data. They compare so many people, can figure it out. It's creepy. It really is.
Yeah, and also by an extension of that as well is the algorithm has a predictive capability as well. So by applying an algorithm to a data set as large as the Earth, if there is even computing capability available to do so in one of these sort of supercomputers that is being built today, you could actually predict which parts of the world are going to develop in the next major technology, for example, by looking at that kind of information. So I think that would be an incredible project. And I'm sure somebody like Google must already be doing something like that. I mean, Google have got their fingers in every pie imaginable. So
it's scary, though. I'll tell you, it's scary. One of the examples I gave in my book, a little speculation, I said, imagine this kind of power, this predictive power based on big data from social media alone. Imagine it in the hands of a dictator with total power, because he or she could use that to not just find the dissenters and the disloyal people in the population, but to predict who 5 years from now may become disloyal. So you can go kill them you can go imprison or kill them before they've even done anything, just because they're on some sort of path that your algorithm predicts will one day make them disloyal to your government. So go get them now and wipe them out.
Nobody tell Donald Trump about this.
Yeah.
Nobody.
God.
As far as Donald Trump's concerned, your book doesn't exist, okay? You don't mind losing one sale, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I for one welcome our AI overlords, and then
how much worse could it be? How much worse could it be? Come on.
At that point, we'll start having conversations about giving AI human rights instead of arguing about race all the time. So I was wondering if you have a perspective on, or have done any historical research on, where did the concept of race even come from, and at what time in history did the concept originate?
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the book. But basically, for your listeners, it's a way, like I said earlier on, we tried to grapple with it. We tried to make sense of it. When I say we, I mean humanity. And you can't say it started here by these people and this culture and this time, because it was happening all over the place, different people, different times. And it was tribes at first. Tribe had a name, and then it went to empires and kingdoms and nations, and then races and all this. I mean, it's just a way of trying to sort each other out. And here's the important point: people don't realize this, and it makes a mockery of belief in these strict, popular, traditional biological race categories, is that even today, you don't have to go back centuries to show how they're inconsistent and illogical and change over, across cultural lines. But even today, the American racial system, when I say racial system, I mean just the labeling, the belief in the names, is completely different from, say, Brazil. They have a totally different setup. A black person in America is not a black person in Brazil. Totally different. I lived in the Cayman Islands for 20 years, and that's a very diverse society. You got all kind of colors and everything there. And it's a funny thing, because there were people, I had friends in the Cayman Islands who in Cayman there, they weren't black. They didn't consider themselves black, and they were not called black people in Cayman. But when those people flew to Miami to do their, Christmas shopping trip in early December, they somehow magically turned into black people in America. They were black because they're those particular ones I'm talking about, light skinned, but have some subtle sort of African features that an American would pick up on and immediately say, that's a black person. So think about how absurd that is. Your race changes at 30,000 feet. I had a friend, I knew a friend of mine in college. She was a very light skinned Haitian, and in Tampa, Florida, where I went to college, she was black. She was a black woman, because even though she was very light-skinned, she's probably lighter skinned than I was, but she had some detectable sort of African features going on, kind of African hair, quote marks. And so she was black because of the one drop rule in America. One drop, you're black. That's the rule. That's the way it is. But when she went home every, summer vacation, she magically turned into a white woman again, because in Haiti, they have the one drop rule, but it's reversed. For them, if you have any detectable European features, you're considered white. So it's completely reversed. And you ask yourself, I mean, what is Haiti doing it wrong? Is Haiti illogical and America's correct? I mean, come on, it makes no sense either way. It's all arbitrary. It's made up stuff, made up rules. Barack Obama, think about this. He's in a different race category from his mother, the woman who gave birth to him. She's a white woman. He's an African American, a black man. So he's not even in the same category of his mother. And biological race is supposed to be about kinship, genetics, your blood. And yet he's in a different race than his own mother. I mean, these things make no sense. That's the absurdity of it. If you listen to this example I give in the book, if you took a white Irishman, stuffed him into a time machine, sent him back to New York City in 1805, when he gets out of the time machine, guess what? He's no longer a white man. He's now something called Irish, which ain't quite white. He's a inferior race that's not full white. Because racial categories change over time. They change across cultures, constantly been changing. It's just a way we try to sort each other out. And the real problems come in because people use them as an excuse to hate. Political leaders use them as a way to stir people up and get votes. Military leaders use them as a way to get your soldiers to hate the enemy a little bit more. It's a very useful thing. When you can pull people down that us versus them path, you can get people to do all sorts of crazy things they might not normally do. So it's a very effective, very useful thing. And one of my key messages, I'm always preaching to people is, look, if we're more realistic about who we are, who we really are, and if we understand better these racial categories, what they really mean, not to say that they don't have meaning for people, because, hey, cultural categories have great meaning. It doesn't mean they're meaningless or they don't exist. Cultural categories are real, so races are real in that sense, absolutely. But you got to get people to understand what they are, because with being more grounded in reality, and being able to look in the mirror and see who you are, and being able to look around you and see who other people's really are and how you connect to them according to science and evidence, then I think we'll do a much better job of addressing problems like racism. Not to say it'll go away. We're always going to have cultural groups clashing with each other and all that. But I think we could do a much, much better job, because many good people kind of throw their hands up in the air and they go, well, hey, we're different races. Nature made us this way. This is just how it is. And they think it's sort of hopeless in that sense. But you can chip away at that kind of mentality if people become educated about our actual state as, the real species that we are.
What do you think is the easiest way, or the most effective way that you found to be able to do that with people, to be able to broach that subject with somebody who's perhaps not particularly willing to engage with somebody because of racial prejudice?
Yeah, first of all, you have to be very sensitive to it. I approach it much the same way I do, because I'm sort of this like skeptic guy, but I'm also, I always try to be a very thoughtful, kind, understanding sort of person who's not out to rain on people's parade and just upset people. I have no interest in winning arguments. I'm more interested in helping people kind of see the light, and just make the world a little better, more sensible. That's my thing. So I'm never really aggressive and rude to people. I really try my best to bend over backward and be respectful, because I understand the emotions and how hard it is, when you believe something. I understand. So when it comes to race, just like maybe, with religion or UFO belief or whatever, I try to be cool and calm about it, and I give examples and little thought experiments. And, I have one I do with race that seems to be very helpful. Like I'll ask people, I'll say, hey, how many oceans are there on planet Earth? And most people they'll say 5, I think 5 or 6 or something like that, and then I say wrong. And they go, what do you mean? Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, they name them all, and then I say, no, you're wrong. That's what you were taught to believe. That's culture's answer. Nature's answer is one. There is one ocean on this planet. And people look at me with a blank face, and then if I'm giving a lecture or something, I have a globe ready, and I go grab the globe. And if you hold the globe, and show it from the bottom perspective, Antarctica, and you look at it, it's shocking, because you see there's just one big giant ocean. It's all connected. There's one big giant ocean. All these different names, we've named them to try to make better sense of them, just for convenience and, that kind of thing. And it's useful. I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm not saying don't name the regions of the one ocean or anything. That's fine. But guess what? Just like with race, just like with human diversity, it helps us in very meaningful, practical ways to understand that there really is just one ocean. There's no magical big giant wall between the Atlantic and Pacific. There's not. Because when we understand there's one ocean, guess what? We start to realize, oh, wait, this big, massive body of salt water is connected. And what we do to one part of the globe may impact it over here. And it helps us to be more sensible, maybe, when it comes to how we interact with the life on this planet, the ocean, marine life, all this stuff. So I think that's a good example. It helps people to see how they can believe something 100% without a doubt, and then suddenly go in an instant, go, oh, wow, I never looked at it that way. So there's ways to do it. One example I like to cite is a fascinating case. 2010, might have been 2009, I think it was 2010, a great study. They sequenced the human genome of Southern African tribesmen. These 2 guys, adult males, who lived within walking distance their entire lives, probably 25 miles apart from each other, their whole lives. And if a typical race believer looked at them, they'd say, oh, of course, they're in the same race. They're black people, But guess what? They found out they had more genetic distance. They were less related to one another than either one of them was to a typical white European or a typical Japanese person. So if race is about biology, kinship, genetics, you would have to, I guess, place those two guys in two different races. You have to place them in with the white people and the Japanese or something. I don't know how you do it. But think about that. I mean, two so-called black guys living within walking distance of one another their entire lives, look very much alike at a glance, complete just canyon, massive genetic distance between them, very far related. That's amazing. People don't realize that. We cannot just look at people and assume this biological race. People do it all the time. If you travel the world with open eyes, this becomes very clear to you. If I've been to Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and I saw some people there that looked, almost like identical twins of people I knew in the Caribbean or people I had seen in Africa, but Pacific Island people are very far away genetically from black sub-Saharan Africans. So there's no, you can be fooled. I could fool race believers all day long. I could take, there's some Native American tribes, put them in neutral clothing. I could place them in front of a fundamentalist race believer and they'd go, oh, that's a Chinese person. I know race. And I'd say, no, you're wrong. That's a Navajo. You can do it. You really can. I could show a certain dark-skinned Fijian in neutral clothing. And he'd say, oh, well, that's an African American, no doubt about it. And I'd say, wrong, distantly related. Whoa, completely wrong. Much more closely related to a Swede than an African American. It's just nonsense. You got to be careful about what your eyes tell you and what your culture has taught you when it comes to who we are. You guys listen, hey, by the way, interrupt me at any point. I keep going on. Listen, I don't want to be rude. This is your show. I keep rambling on. You guys jump in, tell me to shut up and, whatever at any point, okay? I'm not trying to take over your show here, okay? Go ahead.
Actually, we're actually thrilled when our guests talk more than we do. So you're all good.
Definitely, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, this is a good example of an issue like race is a good example of how nonsense can do real harm in society. And I'm thinking of things like the laws against interracial marriage that are an example of how our prejudices actually influence politics and in turn influence people's well-being and emotional well-being and psychology. And you talk about Loving v. Virginia in your book. And the thing I keep coming back to is that the way we all came to be who we are is not being reflected or understood when we make laws forbidding interracial marriage, because the human interbreeding and interracial mixing is a huge part of the human story. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the Out of Africa model to kind of illuminate any of our listeners who aren't aware of this part of the story.
Yeah, well, I had a paleoanthropology professor tell me one time, his great little line, he said, humans have been bumping into each other for tens of thousands of years, just little groups here and there bumping into each other. And he says, sometimes when they come into contact, they would fight, they'd kill each other. But every time they came into contact, they had sex, So it's like kind of like that's sort of been I don't know about every time, but his point was that, yeah, even when we come together in battle and we slaughter each other, we still mix genes. That's just our way, Look at your Bible, the stories of the Bible, it's filled with all these kind of horrific stories of, one tribe coming up on another and slaughtering every male and then taking every woman for a wife, back as a sex slave or whatever. It's just the way, look at ISIS, they take sex slaves. Even now in the 21st century, the same kind of thing going on. It's just it's been the human way, and sometimes in a horrific way, other times, in a loving way. But yeah, we are humans. Come on. We are going to make love. It's our way. And the thing is it's such a great, it's laughable if it wasn't so much tragedy wrapped up in it, but you literally have people constantly. It's countless. People talk about in America, just let's take it America. Okay. You have, white racists talking about how disgusting and backward and inferior black people are. And then Next thing you know, they're having babies with them. Say, what?
And
what? How does that happen? Strom
also
Thurmond.
on that as well, you've got genetic tests done by some of them as well, and they do not like the results when they find out how a lot of them are from. They've got very immediate African ancestry.
Yeah. Strom Thurmond was one of the, he's a senator from South Carolina. He lived to be like 100 or something. He was one of the oldest serving senators ever, and he was a big supporter of segregation, one of the staunch segregationists, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And it came out, he had this secret thing going on with the black woman, like half his life. He had a kid with her and all, and he supported the child and all. I mean, it's just bizarre that, we clearly, even the most racist sees these people as humans. They just get sucked into some bizarre cultural game where they have to say and do these things. But I think on a deep, real, subconscious basis, we know who we are, because otherwise, I don't think we wouldn't see what we've seen throughout history and prehistory. I mean, we are people, and we are so closely related. I can't stress that enough. We don't realize, compared to other, animal species, gosh, we are like one little close fit, practically inbred family. We really are. And these skin color differences and all, not that big a deal, really. It's trivial. We are so closely related. And I don't know. I mean, the whole thing about how we spread out of Africa, the best evidence now, this is an unfinished story. We're still working on it. But the out of Africa model is that, 100,000 years ago, maybe 50,000 years ago, somewhere around in there, humans began migrating beyond Africa. Humans stayed in Africa and expanded beyond Africa as well, into Eurasia, Australia, the islands, everywhere. And just not to confuse people, Homo erectus had already expanded out of Africa prior to that, but they eventually went extinct, so they were replaced.
Yes, because they were a bit gay.
Yeah. Homo erectus, yeah. But when we expanded beyond Africa, we were moving into all these very new and diverse environments, cold in Europe and Australia and all the island environments in the Pacific. And so we adapted, we evolved within these diverse environments. So you fast forward to the 21st century, here we are. And, no big surprise. We got some people dark skinned. We got some people light skinned. We got some people with blonde hair, some people with, dark hair. It's not a big deal. It's not that big a deal. And it's all now with air travel and globalization and all this stuff, it's pretty clear to see where we're heading. I mean, assuming we don't kill ourselves or revert into some bizarre fascist global weirdo society. I mean, we're clearly heading toward a world that will have, borders that are less important or non-existent, and we'll be traveling freely from continent to continent, and we'll be marrying freely without any kind of restrictions or anything. I mean, well, I don't know, hopefully. I mean, even today, religion is a big barrier to really free, borderless mating, because people are so strongly encouraged, either overtly or subtly to marry within your religion. That's still a big thing for billions of people. And so I don't know if we're going to get over that or not, but yeah, I mean, I can see a day where we all just sort of end up blending all back together again. And that's a beautiful thing. And you know what? It doesn't mean we have to lose necessarily our cultural diversity. It doesn't at all. That's the thing. By constantly me harping on this thing about race and racial groups and what's the problems with believing in it and all this, doesn't even mean I don't like everything about racial, cultural groups, not at all. I like the diversity. I love different kinds of food, different kinds of music. I love it all, different kinds of dialects and all. I am totally cool with all of it. I don't want some boring, bland bunch of mono humans walking around the planet like robots, I love the mix. But what I don't like is when a child is born and immediately gets a stamp, jammed on their forehead or something and is thrown into a box. And within that box, that child has to grow up, spend the rest of their life believing in false limitations and having false expectations put upon them just because they're in that box. That's the problem. And being told it's all biology, it's your DNA, kid, live with it. You will never be a physicist because you're in this box, or you will never be a jazz musician because you're in that box. I mean, that's crazy. Come on. That's the problem.
I just want to say when you were talking about the fact that we're such a small species now in terms of our diversity in regards to other species, there's one really great book called Sapiens, which I'm sure you've probably read already.
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah, great book.
It's fantastic, and it talks about the way in which we've actually spread around the world, and also the other species of human that we've actually killed off in the process, or that has been. It's been shown perhaps that we killed them off by our introduction into that particular environment.
Either outcompeted them or maybe killed them off. Could be both, different neighborhoods, different games. But yeah, who knows? But yeah, it's a fascinating story. I mean, gosh, my greatest fantasy, man, is if I had a time machine and could go back and safely observe, the first humans in Africa, the first humans to control fire, I mean, just, to leave Africa and explore new lands and all. I mean, what an amazing story. That's why right now, ironically, I'm working on my next book. It's called At Least Know This, Essential Science to Enhance Your Life. And I'm trying to answer the basic questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? How did we get here? What's this all about? What is the universe? All these kind of basic questions that most people in society really can't answer in a scientific manner. And I'm presenting, the best answers that science can give to these basic questions, even though they may be incomplete and parts of it may turn out to be wrong, a decade or two from now. Still, we've all got to be exposed to these evidence-based answers to questions like who are we, because it helps us be more self-aware and kind of figure out the way forward better. But also, it's just damn exciting stuff. It breaks my heart that most people don't know the human story based on evidence. They don't know the real human story, because it is an absolute epic adventure, to think, I mean, Homo erectus, these humans with brains smaller than ours, but still powerful, made tools, they controlled fire, they made shelters, and they walked and rafted their way, practically around the world. I mean, what a story, that is amazing. But you go out on the street, you ask 10 people, hey, tell me the story of Homo erectus. And they're like, what? Yeah, they'll think it's the name of some gay porn movie or something. Yeah, they don't even know what you're talking about, And I'm like, no, it's heartbreaking, because you can take real pride in this, that we are such an unlikely survivor. We did it, and there maybe not everything is to be something we should be proud of. Like maybe we did slaughter the Neanderthals in Europe. I don't know. Maybe it was genocide. So it's not all good. But I'm saying, like, wow, what an amazing story that led to you and me. We should try to know it. And science is constantly telling that story, answering these questions, more and more for us. All we have to do is pay attention and learn.
Yeah, the way you put it in your book is people who know people don't believe in race. And that's a reference to anthropologists, of course. And do you have any theories or ideas about why this stuff isn't being taught before people go to college and learn it in an ivory tower anthropology class?
Hey, I don't know. There's a lot of things that are not taught in elementary school, primary school, or high school that should be. I'm always harping on this too. I mean, critical thinking classes should be mandatory from, first grade. You should be teaching humans how to think. That is such a basic thing, and we don't do it. A typical student can go through college and graduate, bachelor's degree, never take a course in critical thinking, how to just think through claims and why doubting claims is important, how to assess evidence, how to be a scientific thinker. These things are not taught routinely to every student. They're just not, and it's tragic. And yeah, if we taught children the human story, oh my gosh, we would be a much more sensible species, I believe. And the obvious problems are that a lot of it clashes with religion. Let's not avoid the issue here. A lot of it clashes with religion. I mean, we can't even teach basic modern biology in many schools because it's just upsetting and, unsettling to many people. So you just kind of duck it and avoid it like it's not really there, I mean, think about it. Evolution's such a contentious buzzword in many parts of the world, but, all evolution is an explanation for how life changes over time. And to deny that life changes over time is to be pretty much insane, or to have something wrong with you. I mean, life changes over time. Clearly it does. And evolution is the best available explanation we have for how life changes over time. And we may
This is why the situation in Turkey is so worrying as well, because evolution has been taken out of schools, and jihad as a method of social, what was the word for it again? Patriotism. So jihad is now being taught as a patriotic thing, and evolution is taken out of schools. And then you've got the push in America, of course, for so-called intelligent design to be introduced as an alternative to evolution as well. And then the rise of flat Earth society. How wonderful!
I know. I know. One of the things I point out a lot is many times is that there's a real practical side to critical thinking, to knowing the basics of who we are, where we are, what the earth is, how old the earth is. I mean, think about this. For example, I am jihad proof, okay? I'm ISIS proof. I could never be radicalized into getting all excited and getting all worked up and jumping on a plane and heading off to Syria to fight for ISIS. You know why? Not because I'm somehow morally better than others who have done this, not because I'm just a good person at heart. No, I could be led astray. I could be led down some dark path. I'm human. It's possible maybe. But you know why I'm ISIS proof, jihad proof, radicalization proof? It's because I know how old the damn earth is. I know that life changes over time. If somebody came to me and they said, hey, guess what? We've got the truth here, man. We need to go fight for Islam because these are the end times. A lot of people don't know this, but a big part of the Islam theology is that the world's about to end. And what they're trying to do, it's very similar to the whole Christian end times thing. What they're trying to do is be a part of this end time story where the Antichrist is going to come back. He's on earth right now, chained up, ready to go, ready to break free. And there's this town in Syria that's like the focal point of all this. And that's their whole thing. And they believe the earth is less than 10,000 years old. They reject evolution, all the usual checklist of lunacy. And so if somebody came to me with that story, okay, with that package, trying to sell me that, and then said, okay, what do you think? Are you on board? Come on, get on a plane, come over and let's start killing people so we can make all this happen. I'd be like, no, you're an idiot. You think the earth is 10,000 years old and you think evolution is a satanic lie? No, I can't. If I can't trust you on basic biology and the age of the earth, why in the world would I trust you on, who I should kill? Not going to happen. Sorry, I'm not with you. So anybody that had a basic, half semester course in critical thinking, took a geology course, or had a basic competent education in biology should be ISIS proof, I would think. I mean, I don't know what's going on there, but that said, there's a lot of very educated people who fall for jihad, and let's not just pick on the Muslims, other types of kind of wacko fringe, religious or otherwise hate groups that really get carried away and do violence. I mean, it can happen. I mean, it's not about being stupid. Okay. Let's not confuse the issue here. You can be very intelligent. You can be highly educated. Muhammad Atta, the lead hijacker, 9/11, I think he had an engineering degree or was close to it, something like that. Highly educated, not some bumbling moron by any means, So it's not about being stupid. It's not about being uneducated. The big problem is that you're not thinking. You're not thinking clearly like a scientist. That's the problem, and that's, I always encourage people, do not make the mistake of confusing intelligence and education for being a good thinker. Two different things. If you don't have your skeptical force field up and running, you are vulnerable to anything. I don't care who you are. You got to watch out.
Yeah, the way I've heard it described by other academics who have talked and written about why people believe weird things is smart people believe weird things because they're better at rationalizing the reasons why they believe these unsupportable things. And it sounds like when we're talking about race and racism, it sounds like from our discussion so far that the first step to solving the problem of racism is education and educating people on the human story that we've been talking about. But then you think about how emotionally driven the whole controversy is, and you think of the video footage from events like Charlottesville, and all the things that are going on this year with neo-Nazis in the streets and whatnot. And it's become such an emotionally driven issue that makes it a challenge to take somebody aside and start teaching them about anthropology. How do we do something like that instead of, say, punching Nazis?
You can't teach the unwilling, can you? That's the problem. If somebody's not willing to learn, if somebody's blocked off to that, if they're closed-minded to anything that's outside of their dogma, then there's very little you can do, I think. Yeah, they have to be willing in the first instance to open their ears and their minds to the concept that they might actually be wrong in what they think.
You're right. But I tell you what, I encourage you guys, try anyway, because as discouraging as it is, as impossible as it seems, and I've learned this, personal experience, I've learned this, that people do change. It can happen. And, I've had religious debates with people, and at the end of it, it seemed utterly pointless. They didn't, they dug their heels in so deep on the most absurd little minor points and would not concede anything. It seems pointless. But only, I found years later, they come back and we talk and things have changed. And you got to keep in mind, when you talk to people, when you educate people, when you point things out to them, when you give them little thought experience, point out examples to them that can be constructive and helpful, you just might be doing more good than you realize, because no matter what their posture or tone may be as they walk away from you in that moment, there's a good chance you might have planted a seed, and they may be thinking and they may be working through it. And it may take years, but good things may come from that little seed. I've seen it many, many times. And then not just my own personal experience, but look at America as a whole. Look at the world as a whole. I mean, believe it or not, we're getting somewhere, we're getting somewhere. Yes, some people are still sacrificing animals, to appease the gods. In some places they still do that. But it used to be everybody everywhere. It's not anymore. We used to sacrifice humans, and stuff like that. It's, that's pretty much gone out of, favoritism in most places, out of favor. So we are making a little progress here. There are signs of progress. So don't lose hope. Don't ever think it's pointless or hopeless, because I've seen it too many times. You got to keep in mind, what you mentioned there, Nathan, the emotions tied up in this. It makes it almost impossible for someone in real time, right in your face, to go, yeah, you're right. I'm not going to be a Nazi. I'm going to give it up today. No, because they've just gone so far down that rabbit hole, they're not going to let go. But you know what? Next month, next year, they might let it go. And it might be directly because of something you said, you pointed out to them. And, and that's why, the punch a Nazi thing, I understand the frustration, the emotion, the fear, the anger. I get it. But I don't know of a single Nazi who was ever converted by getting punched in the face. I mean, individual. I'm not talking World War II Nazi societies being beaten with bombs and all that and B-17s. No, different thing. But punching an individual Nazi in the face probably ain't going to change his mind. It's going to make him more fearful, more angry, which is the reason he's a Nazi in the first place. It's going to make him motivated to be more stupid and obnoxious. But there are many, many examples of people, Nazis. When I say Nazi, I mean just a racist, KKK, whatever kind of person. But I know of many examples of people who left that belief system, walked away from that lifestyle, that bizarre fantasy land, and they said it was because of things people said to me. It was because of something I read, something I saw. It changed my mind. And I even interviewed a woman who was a survivor of Auschwitz. She was experimented on as a child by Joseph Mengele, the infamous doctor at Auschwitz. She survived that. Now, if anybody should hate Nazis, it should be her, right? But she dedicated her life to fighting Nazis, KKK people, all racist in America. And how did she do it? By punching them? No. Violence? No. By loving them, getting in their face, courageously getting in their face, loving them, talking to them, educating them, stubbornly talking to them. Keep going. And she converted many of them, tiny little woman. I mean, that's just one example. I gave you a bunch, but yeah, we cannot lose hope in better words, better ideas, because they have tremendous power, and you just can't give up so easily. You can't get too frustrated. I mean, there was a time when Nazis had a powerful army. Now they're a bunch of kooky morons with tiki torches, and yeah, there's too many of them. It's scary, and we got to watch out. We got to confront them. We should be concerned, but not by trying to punch them, exterminate them, silence them with violence. I mean, I don't think that's the answer. I mean, I'm optimistic enough. I think that we can think our way out of this problem, but it won't be easy, and it won't be simple. It'll take courage. And I tell you what. And let me say this final point. I'm on another rant here. I apologize, but I'm telling you, listen. It takes more courage to get in the face of a Nazi, a racist, and talk to them and listen to their disgusting ideas and argue back with them in a constructive, productive way that is designed to change their mind. And that is much more difficult to do, and it takes more courage than just punching them and running away or throwing a rock at them. That doesn't take much courage, to be honest.
I think you'll agree as well, though, that it's good to pick your fights. So, and also to perhaps use a more epistemological approach rather than sort of directly just saying, you're wrong, here's a meme, like a lot of people on Twitter will do. So, for example, Twitter is not a very good platform for conversation most of the time.
We're not going to save the world with 40 characters or whatever, 140 characters, yeah.
Well, it's going to be 280 soon, apparently. Whoop-de-doo. But still, I mean, I for example, I'm open about my beliefs in terms of my atheism and my not believing that the earth is flat on Twitter, and have been for years, and I have these conversations, and some of them are quite fruitful. But others of them, for example, I'll get people randomly who I've never spoken to before coming to me and say, show me a picture of the earth as a pear shape. And I'm like, the earth isn't a pear shape. And they'll go, this is what you think it looks like. And it's like a picture of a pear with the earth wrapped around it. And you're like, no. So those people, it's quite okay, I think you'll agree, to just basically not engage with them on the level of that they want you to, and perhaps just to ask them questions about why they believe what they do, what kind of basis they have for their beliefs, rather than giving in and just giving them evidence for things that they are dishonestly requesting sort of this perfect ideal gotcha for.
Yeah, one thing that maybe works within the big picture with racists as well as flat earth believers is multiple voices coming at them from different angles, where you have some people mocking them, some people just ridiculing them, making fun of them for their beliefs. You have other people being very mean and abrasive and just condescending and rude and name calling. And then you have other people like me, the little goody two shoes over here, trying to be super nice and polite and hold their hand and walk them over to the round earth belief, all patient and everything. Maybe it takes all voices, to reach them. Maybe that's what it is. I mean, you look at the civil rights movement in America. You had Martin Luther King on one side preaching nonviolence, love, and tolerance, and let's get there by holding hands and don't strike back, take the punch, and keep moving forward. And then you have Malcolm X on the other side saying, to hell with that. I'm going to punch that racist in the face, And I think maybe I'm not advocating the punching, but I'm saying it helps. No doubt it helps to have kind of different volume, different angles of attack coming at you when you hold a negative or irrational belief, because maybe something will work on this guy that doesn't work on the other guy. So hey, there's a place for diversity of responses.
It takes all sorts, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good, positive, constructive note to end on. As we wrap up, Guy, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and read your work?
Yeah, I've got a website, guypharrison.com. P as in Paul, I guess. That's not my middle name, but Paul. Guy P. Harrison. You can also find me on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. I've got author pages there. Just search Guy P. Harrison. Yeah, I've got a variety of books, from everything from religion to race to UFOs and Bigfoot and all kind of fun stuff like that, to social media now. One's coming up soon, Think Before You Like. So yeah, check those out. And I really do encourage people to read my books. I really believe in them. And believe me, I'm not trying to sell books or anything. They're in public libraries. Go, if you don't want to spend any money, fine, go check one out. But, the information in them, the reason I wrote them, the reason I worked so hard on all these books is because I honestly know that people need to get this information. It would make your life better, make the world better potentially. This is good stuff we all need, good basic information. I would never claim to be Shakespeare, some wonderful poetic writer, but I'm telling you, I have interviewed so many brilliant scientists, brilliant thinkers, and I've looked at so many really important studies, and I've traveled to so many places, interviewed so many interesting people, put it all down in really easy to read language anybody can get something out of, that I really, really encourage people to please check these books out because, gosh, it hurts my heart when I see America today. I see the world today. We continue to just shoot ourselves in the foot. We create, for all the real problems we have, we create so many for ourselves. We could be such a much more sensible, rational, productive, efficient, safer species if we would just be more reality based, if we would just look to science a little more and be more honest about who we are, where we are, and what we're doing.
Thanks very much for that.
Good words. Well, thank you, Guy P. Harrison, for joining us today.
You're so welcome. You guys, great. Yeah, great talk. Love you guys. Good luck with the podcast, man. Keep it going. The world needs you.
Thanks, Guy.
And that was our show for today. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trolling with Logic. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. If you love the show, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Supporting us at $5 or more per episode will get you access to exclusive, patron-only bonus content, early access to shows before everyone else, and other incentives. We are an amateur production, but with your patronage, we can help improve our audio quality and cover the costs for doing the show. We are grateful for anything you can pledge to the show. Go to www.patreon.com/trollingwithlogic to sign up if you are so inclined. We want to thank our 4 patrons who currently have chosen to support us. These patrons are Microbloganism, Josh at the Society for the Advancement of Science, Avinash Kumar, and Brian Curran. Thank you very much for your support, which is helping us out. If you have any suggestions for topics or guests you would like to hear on this show, let us know on Twitter or on our Facebook page. Thanks again for listening.
How did our genus used to be pretty crowded. There were several human species running around in Africa, at the same time. And only one of them survived. The last 2 faded away 30,000, 50,000 years ago. Here we are all alone. Well, how did we get here? How are we alike? How are we different? These are fundamental questions we've got to ask and answer. And the thing is, science can answer them very well for us right now. There's many, many questions to be answered, of course, but there's really good information out there for anyone. You just got to ask the question, look for the answers, and you got to be honest about what you find, because the problem is, like I said, these racial labels have become so important to us. Oh, they're just absolutely vital for many people. Their whole self-worth, their self-perception is tangled up in this racial belief thing, and it's a real problem, a real problem. But it's crucial. I want to repeat this one more time so your listeners hear me loud and clear, okay? I do not deny biological diversity. I do not deny real differences in the human species. If they're real, they're there. No problem. Let's deal with them. No problem. What I deny is a category called black people, and people thinking that actually makes some kind of biological sense. It's nonsense. Think about it. Barack Obama, real quick, 30-second example here. Barack Obama, the first African-American president in American history, historic achievement, right? But you know what's weird about that? He is more genetically distant from a typical African American than I am as a person that would be considered a white person of recent European descent. He's more closely related to me by far because we're a very young and a relatively closely related species, no doubt about that. But we do have differences. We adapted to different environments on different continents. We've had different sexual dynamics and populations. Things have happened differently for people around the world, and we all, kind of look a little different, and you can draw some conclusions and be right most of the time or some of the time by looking at people. That's all true. We come in all shapes and sizes, all kinds of colors. All that is true. No denial of that. The problem is that in trying to make sense of ourselves over the last, several centuries, we've constantly tried to label each other. And we have failed miserably at it because it just doesn't make sense. It's just a cultural game, applying these labels to huge populations, groups of people, and then pretending that it's completely biological. It's all, nature imposed this on us. We didn't do it. Nature did. You're over in that category and I'm in this category because of nature, nothing to do with culture. And that's wrong. That's completely wrong. And the real problem, the reason we need to come to grips with this and see ourselves in a more realistic light is because it causes all kinds of harm. Because when you label people, when you place them into these boxes, you do so with all these imposed psychological restrictions and implied talents, things like that can really affect people, sometimes good, but most of the time in negative ways. I mean, we are squandering tremendous efficiency. Our species could be so much more productive and peaceful, I believe, if we had a more realistic view of ourselves. If we understood our evolutionary history, if we all understood how we kind of fit together, how we got here, how did...
Written 7 books that promote critical thinking and skepticism, including 50 popular beliefs that people think are true, Think Why You Should Question Everything, and the book we're discussing today, Race and Reality, What Everyone Should Know About Our Biological Diversity. He joins us on the show today to talk about the science and social issues behind race and diversity and whether any of the preconceptions we have on this issue are backed up by science and evidence. Welcome to the show, Guy P. Harrison.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to talking with you.
So I've read your book, Race and Reality, and thought that it was full of issues that have become relevant in recent years and seem to be becoming more and more relevant as each passing year goes by. And you kind of opened the book hitting the ground running by saying straight off the bat, biological races do not exist. And what do you mean by that? What are we talking about when we talk about race, and why doesn't it exist when it seems like such a common sense concept to almost everybody?
Yeah, you're great at your job because you asked the perfect question to start with, because this topic is so confounding and confusing and inflammatory, and people have so much emotional investment in it that it's really hard to hear what people say when you're talking about race. But one thing I just always have to make crystal clear before we get into the details is exactly what I'm claiming. Okay, when I say biological races are not real, that is in no way a denial of human biological diversity. That's real. Okay, I'm not some guy who's trying to do away with racism by closing my eyes at the reality before us. We are different. We do have differences. Imagine this kind of power, this predictive power based on big data from social media alone. Imagine it in the hands of a dictator with total power, because he or she could use that to not just find the dissenters and the disloyal people in the population, but to predict who 5 years from now may become disloyal. So you can go kill them you can go imprison or kill them before they've even done anything, just because they're on some sort of path that your algorithm predicts will one day make them disloyal to your government.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trolling with Logic, where we bring the hammer down on ignorance, unreason, and superstition on a bi-weekly basis. I'm your host, Nathan Dickey, and here with me today is Jenna and Cal.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yes, all good.
Yeah.
Just about.
It's always a bonus.
Joining us today as our special guest for this episode is Guy P. Harrison. Guy is an award-winning journalist and globetrotter who has visited 28 countries on 6 continents. Does that sound right to you?
I think I'm up to about 31 now, but yeah, close enough, whatever. Who's counting?
And he's talked to people of all kinds of backgrounds and persuasions to understand basically what makes humans tick.
His mother is a white woman, okay, and his father was an East African, and by far the overwhelming majority of African Americans, their genetic ancestry, their recent ancestry goes to West Africa, and West Africans, East Africans, very distant genetically, very distant. It's absurd to lump them into one race and think it makes biological sense. All right, I could go on forever, but you guys talk. Go ahead.
I'm so intrigued to hear you say that, because labeling is one of my bugbears anyway, not just in sort of racial labeling, but beyond that, in the LGBT community, for example, which is constantly being split out into more and more subcategories and more diverse sort of definitions of individuals. And then, of course, beyond that, into more and more diverse genders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People are trying to segregate themselves and make their unique personality into this sort of unique pocket that is just them and people like them. And this is something that incredibly frustrates me, because that increased division is something that I've been trying to work against my entire life.
That's
as
a good point,
transsexual
Jenna.
person. And it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, you know what, Jenna. As you'll find as the conversation goes on, I'm an absurd optimist. I always hope for the best, and want everything to work out so well. But one thing, you're exactly right about this constant shrinking down of more and more categories and shoving everybody into them and all. I think what's happening, we're going through a process maybe where we're kind of waking up to the fact that, hey, there's a lot of differences between us. Physically and psychologically, culturally, we've got all these differences, and we've been reacting to it by dividing ourselves. But I think hopefully maybe we can get to a point where we realize, wow, we are just a trillion different things, but we're all one. And then all of a sudden, once we accept